Chapter 1. Biosophical Endocrinology. The sexual regeneration of man, the elixir of life. Most of the great religions of the world were founded on one basic doctrine: the value of continence or chastity, usually exemplified in the immaculate sexual life, or rather non-sexual life, of their founders, which was supposed to serve as a model for their followers. Coupled with this doctrine was that of parthenogenesis, of virgin birth, namely, that it is not necessary to commit the sexual act in order to render women fertile, so that continence may be practiced strictly and yet the race can continue. While originally a biosophical doctrine of human regeneration, the physiological value of continence later degenerated into a purely moral or ethical virtue, without hygienic significance, and finally became an exclusive attainment of a supernatural Son of God, and hence impractical for most humans. As a result, there developed a dualism of monastic orders claiming monopoly on this valuable physiological practice of sex hormone conservation, as apart from the churchgoers, who were taught that they were natural sinners, and that the monks, by their austerity, vicariously atoned for their sins and so deserved their economic support. Through such false indoctrination, religion became a means of spreading vice and moral degeneration, rather than chastity. With the decadence of the old religions, Biosophy is destined to rise as a new religion based on a scientific conception of the physiological value of continence as a conservation of valuable sex hormones whose loss is depleting and harmful to body and brain and conservation beneficial. Dr. J. R. Brinkley, eminent endocrinologist, expresses the physiological reasons for sex hormone conservation as follows: I have not swerved from my original conception that the source of all human energy is sex energy, which is another way of saying that the glandular system of man is a chained system of series of connecting loops, mutually assisting or depressing each other by their secretions, of which series the genital glands seem to have the power of most directly stimulating and in a measure dominating the human body and mind by their particular kind of hormones, manufactured by the sex glands and distributed by the blood stream for the nourishment of all the tissues of the body. An English physician, Dr. Nags, writes on this same subject: strict continence enables the essence of these sexual secretions to be reabsorbed into the body. This not only makes for health but also builds up those creative, intellectual and intuitive faculties which show themselves in the work we do. Moreover, when we have learned to control this reproductive function, to turn inwards the mighty forces which it represents, we have solved one of the important problems of existence which bring us nearer to that superhuman stage to which we must ultimately attain. The medieval alchemists were really endocrinologists, and the magnus opum which they sought was not the artificial creation of gold out of lead but the sublimation and refinement of sexual energy, when denied a lower outlet, into higher brain power through the ascent of the kundalini force from the pelvis to the brain. The conservation and transmutation of this vital force was their elixir of everlasting youth and the secret of physical immortality for which they sought. In our own day, modern physiologists have been engaged in a similar quest. Several decades ago, Brown-Séquard, the great French physiologist, put forward the assertion that the main cause of old age was a diminution in the quantity of absorbed seminal fluid, the internal sex secretion, present in the blood, and that its cure depended upon enriching the blood with this secretion. This, he thought, could be accomplished by a cutaneous injection of the spermatic fluid of an animal. He failed to realize that a hygienic and continent life will cause the individual's own sex glands to be reawakened. The Brown-Séquard elixir, however, proved ineffective, for it produced only a temporary invigoration. The next step in this direction was the direct implantation of animal sex glands into the human organism. But this glandular grafting of Dr. Voronoff, though it resulted in a longer stimulation, did not effect a permanent cure. If an old man may be temporarily rejuvenated by the implantation of the testicles of a goat or a monkey, surely he would have never grown old if he had retained his own in a normal condition by a continent life. Senility, which is a product of sterility or impotence, is an after-effect of persistent sexual indulgence. The grafting of animal glands, like the Brown-Séquard spermatic injection, is a temporary, ineffective and fallacious method of rejuvenation, which does more harm than good. Weak genital glands, like any other weak part of the body, may be brought back to their normal state by the conservation of their secretions and by the purification of the blood through a natural diet. The esoteric doctrine of the eternal life did not refer to the future existence of the soul in heaven, but to the present immortality of the physical body on earth. Immortality is to be obtained right now, in the physical world, by hygienic and continent living. The doctrine of resurrection meant the transition from a mortal, decaying physiological state to an immortal, non-catabolic one. Most of us are walking around half dead. 4/5 of our brain cells are inactive as a result of having been poisoned by injurious foods. By rejuvenating the body through obedience to the laws of nature, we may be raised from the dead, we may be resurrected. The disease of senility may be permanently cured. Death is not a sudden occurrence, it is the termination of a slow process of dying. This dying, or cellular disintegration, may commence at birth. It is hastened by eating decaying, dead food, and by losing seminal fluid. This fluid, when retained within the body, becomes the elixir of eternal youth. When a man loses his seed in generation or sex indulgence, he throws away his creative substance, and, in so doing, hastens death. He may not know the reason for the consciousness of the uncertainty of life, and the fear of death that is ever with him, but it is there, with the average, normal person, if he is honest and will admit it. This state of consciousness is caused by the loss of life, the life which should be retained within the body for its own health and increased vitality, and the strengthening of the mind. The sin of Onan, the waste of life fluid, was punished by death. This punishment was not an act of supernatural vengeance, but the physiological consequence of the loss of the power which animates the body. It does not occur suddenly, but gradually. This gradual dying, which we call old age, is the natural result of sex indulgence. Gray hair is not to be venerated, it is a symbol of a wild and dissipated youth. One who lives as nature intended man to live, in absolute chastity, will never grow old. Lifelong continence and a fruit diet will ensure perpetual youth. That old age is simply the product of weakened sex glands as a result of previous abuse, is proved by the following statements by Dr. Voronoff: decrepit old men are, in reality, eunuchs. They have been emasculated. I have never known a eunuch to exceed the age of 60. Well before death they have the appearance of old men, and from this one might be tempted to attribute a very advanced age to them, but this would be a pure illusion. They have every appearance of being effectively aged: dry skin, bloated body, dull eyes. They have a stooping gait which gives one the impression that they are centenarians. Their death seems to be the normal end of old age, but verification of the facts usually indicates that they died when between 50 and 60 years of age. Their aspect is the outcome of the fact that, deprived of the essential factor of youth and vigor, they have prematurely aged and have died well before the term ordinarily attained by normal men. Thus, then, the lack of the internal secretions from the sexual glands shortens life. It could not be otherwise. It is unthinkable that a body deprived of the organs the suppression of which renders the blood poor, the bones frail, the muscles feebler, fat more abundant, nutrition imperfect, should not suffer a general enfeeblement, become more vulnerable and less able to struggle against the causes which always bring about death well before the normal physiological time. It may be affirmed then, that deprivation of the interstitial glands' internal secretion accelerates the advent of old age and shortens life. On the other hand, the maintenance of this source of vital energy is the best guarantee of longevity. Men who are endowed with active interstitial glands and in whom the functioning of these glands is not extinguished, live to be very old. In relation to the individuals of ancient biblical times, whose periods of life was supposed to have existed for more than 1,000 years, the man of today is a eunuch who dies prematurely. The longevity of these prehistoric people was due to their fruit diet and to their lifelong chastity. Increasing incontinence, however, led to a gradual decrease in the length of life, until it extended for only 125 years, and finally for only 70 years. Yet the human body was never supposed to decline or die, but to live forever, always increasing in youthfulness, strength and beauty. Old age and death, like disease, are the consequences of continued disobedience to nature's laws. Mechnikov considered the problem of old age from another point of view. He attributed senility to the fermentation and bacterial decomposition of waste matter in the intestines. He thought that he found the elixir of youth in a fermented milk called yogurt, which was supposed to contain bacteria that would counteract the toxic ones. However, he failed to realize that pathogenic bacteria may not thrive unless they have decaying matter on which to feed, which is provided for them when animal foods are eaten, and that a raw vegetable and fruit diet will keep the intestinal tract in a state of perfect purity. Certain foods cause organic decay, while others prevent it. By eating only the latter, raw fresh vegetables and fruit, our flesh may be chemically preserved, and we may become living mummies. Aging results from a counterbalancing of anabolic, constructive, processes by catabolic, destructive, ones, and a raw fruit diet causes the former always to predominate, so that the tissues remain indefinitely as fresh and pure as those of an infant. Dr. Tilney, the neurologist, says, there is strong argument in favor of the theory which holds old age in the brain, as in other organs, to be the result of life's successive and cumulative intoxications. Old age in the brain is much more often the result of disease than of some inherent aging process. Thomas Parr, who led a simple and unstimulating life in the country, subsisting on a natural diet, lived to be 152 years of age. His death was caused by the rich foods given to him when the King of England invited him to his palace. A post-mortem examination of his body, made by Harvey, revealed the fact that its organs were in perfect condition, his sex glands being large and voluminous. If he had continued his former way of living, there is no reason why he could not have reached his 200th year. On the island of San Salvador, a case was reported of a farmer who lived to be 180 years old. He, also, lived simply and chastely, eating only one meal a day, using meat very seldom, and fasting at regular intervals.